Today we're going to start Unit 4. Unit 4 is going to consist of two parts. The first part we're going to go over is going to be this first video here, and it's going to consist of photosynthesis and how plants are able to make energy using the sun. And then the second part that we're going to go over is going to be in part 2 video, and that's going to consist of cellular respiration. So let's get started. So with energy, it's able to come from the sun and go into a chemical form that we're able to use, and that's going to be processed through photosynthesis. So energy flows from the sun and through all of life on Earth. Sources of energy are going to be two main sources. First, we have the sun, and that's our solar energy source. That's where we get most of the energy from. And then we have a second form of energy that we can use, and that's through inorganic chemicals like geothermal energy. Energy flows from the sun into other organisms using a photoautotroph. Those are organisms that are able to capture the sunlight and create their own food. These are going to be things like plants. And so they're going to carry out photosynthesis to acquire this energy. So they use energy from sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. They have to have these three things, and then they're going to convert it into organic materials used in cellular functions such as biosynthesis and respiration. This is going to help provide nutrition for all other forms of life. Energy is continually flowing from one organism into another, and that's going to include plants, algae, and cyanobacteria. All of these things are able to perform photosynthesis. Now with these, as it flows from one form to the next or from one animal to the next, it's not going to be able to take in all of the energy that was in that first form. So as it flows through the system, it's going to start to lose about 10%. It's only about 10% is actually going to travel through. Chemo Autotrophs are going to be organisms that obtain energy by the oxidation of electron-donating molecules in their environments. So they can synthesize all necessary compounds from things like carbon dioxide. Generally, they only use inorganic energy sources to produce their food or get their energy. And this is going to include things such as bacteria and sometimes archaea that are living in very hostile environments. Energy flow from photoautotrophs and chemo autotrophs is going to go into other things, and these other things are going to be called heterotrophic organisms. So they rely on other organisms in order to get their energy. So they can be dependent on photo and chemo autotrophs to supply their energy needs. So not just one always, it could be both. So cars that run on French fry oil. So organisms and machines need energy to work. So what are biofuels? Lots of times when we think of biofuels, you think of bio meaning living, and fuel, of course, is going to be something such as you see this corn cob they're putting into the car. So they're hoping to fuel things using living things that we have on Earth, not waiting for these things to biodegrade and break down and create the crude oil that we have been using. So it turns out the biofuels, fossil fuels, and the food fuels that supply energy to most living organisms are going to be chemically similar. So they're going to be made up of chains of carbon and hydrogen atoms, which we often refer to as hydrocarbons. That energy is going to be stored in the bonds between the carbon and hydrogen. When these bonds are broken, large amounts of energy are released. And so as it's releasing them, you're also going to have a release of water and carbon dioxide. So what they found in these bonds is that they can actually grow things like corn and change them into ethanol, and they can work similar to those of fossil fuels. You can also use things like animal fats and oils. There was a while back when people were converting their engines so that they could use oil that was being used at restaurants as a fuel source. So they would go by these restaurants and they would get the used oil that the restaurant would normally throw out, and they would use it kind of like gasoline or fuel in their car. So how do fuels provide energy? The activities of living organisms are going to be fueled by breaking those chemical bonds, and once it breaks those bonds, it releases that energy that it's able to use. Energy conversions are going to be very important. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, it only changes form. So all life is going to depend on capturing energy from the sun and then converting it into a form that it can use. So there's going to be two key processes that can do this. Photosynthesis can capture sunlight energy, convert it over into a chemical energy that the cells can use, and then the cell is going to take that chemical energy, break it apart during cellular respiration, and convert it over to a form that it can use. And that's going to be done through a process known as cellular respiration. So here's just a little visual showing you that the sun is providing energy for the grass changes it over into a glucose molecule. That animal is going to use the grass as a food source. That food is then going to go into its body, get broken down, and then processed over into another form of energy that it can use. So in summary, the sun's going to be the source of energy that powers all living organisms and other machines. The energy from the sunlight is going to be stored in chemical bonds of molecules. When these bonds are broken, energy is released regardless of whether the bond is a molecule of food, a fossil fuel, or a biofuel, like the oil in which we fry French fries and other foods. Energy is going to have two forms. You have what's referred to as kinetic energy and potential energy. First off, what exactly is energy? Energy is going to be defined as the capacity to do work, and work is going to be defined as moving matter against an opposing force. So energy is going to be used by cells for development, growth, repair, and reproduction. Lots of times we wonder how this energy is measured. When we're talking about energy for our bodies, we measure it in what's called a calorie. That's going to be the amount of energy required to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. Kilocalories are the most common unit for measurement. So when you look at the box, if you look at anything that's from another country, it actually says kilocalories. Here in the United States, we just refer to it as a calorie. So it's the energy content of food and heat output of an organism. Energy required to raise the temperature, like we said, 1 kilogram of water though, 1 degree Celsius, and that's going to equal 1,000 calories. So a kilo is going to be 1,000. Nutritional labels are actually going to be kilocalories. So 1 gram of carbohydrates, like we discussed in the last unit, has 4 calories. 1 gram of protein, 4 calories. And then 1 gram of fat is actually going to have 9 calories. So looking at energy, we said there were two types. You have kinetic and potential. With kinetic energy, that's going to be the energy of movement, so anything that's actually moving. Potential energy is going to be stored energy. It could be stored due to its location. For example, looking at this water, it has a lot of potential energy. It's stored above in this dam, but if you opened it and released it, then it would move, so it would have kinetic energy. The person standing at the top of the hill getting ready to ski down has a lot of potential energy. Now, once he actually starts to move, then it changes over into kinetic energy. So kinetic energy simply is going to be the energy of moving objects. Examples of kinetic energy are going to be things like heat energy, heat moves, light energy, and even sound, on top of actually moving. Potential energy is going to be stored energy. Now, we talked about it being according to where it's placed, but it also can be stored in chemicals. So, for example, food has potential energy. It's stored in those chemical bonds that you take into your body. So looking at this apple, you're going to see the glucose, which is the sugar that's made from the process of photosynthesis. In those bonds between the carbon and hydrogens, that's where you're going to find that chemical energy and where it's stored. So once those bonds are broken, the energy is released, it then becomes potential energy or kinetic energy. But until it's released and used in a form to move your body, it is still stored in a chemical form, so that is potential energy. So in summary, energy is going to be the capacity to do work, and it comes in two forms. Kinetic energy is going to be the energy of moving objects. Potential energy is stored energy or the capacity to do work that results from the position or location of an object. As energy is captured and converted, the amount of energy available to do work is going to decrease. So remember when I said the energy from the food that one animal eats decreases as it goes from one form to the next. This is done through energy conversion. So only about 1% of the energy released by the sun on Earth is actually even going to be captured and converted by plants. So what's going to happen to the other 99%? Well, if you look at the picture, you can see how a lot of that energy is going to be released as heat. And so you lose a lot of energy as heat. Some of it gets bounced back into the atmosphere. Some of it actually gets absorbed by water in the oceans or by the land. So the rest of the energy, like we said, is reflected. About 30% actually goes back into space. And then about the other 70% is going to be absorbed by land, oceans, and the atmosphere around us. Mostly, it's going to be transformed into the form of heat. Heat is how we technically don't lose energy, but that's the type of energy it technically gets transferred over into mostly. Thermodynamics is going to be the study of the transformation of energy from one type to another. First law of thermodynamics is energy conservation. Energy is neither created or destroyed, it only changes form. And the second law, energy cannot change from one form to another without some loss. And so it's actually going to change over into something else. So with this first law, it can only change from one form to another. And there is what we refer to as an energy tax. So every time energy is converted from one form to another, the conversion isn't perfect. Some of the energy is always going to be converted into the least usable form of kinetic energy, and that is heat. We lose a lot of energy through heat. With that second law, we said every conversion of energy includes the transformation of some energy into heat, and it is almost completely useless in living organisms. Heat can never be converted back into another form of energy. And so with that, a lot of the energy that we're using in our body, when it releases, it's going to actually go, when it goes through metabolic reactions, is released as heat, and that's what helps keep our bodies warm, but we do not need all of that heat. So we're constantly emitting heat that emits from our body and leaves our body. So energy is neither created nor destroyed, but can change forms. Each conversion of energy is inefficient, and some of the usable energy is converted to less useful heat energy. ATP molecules are going to be like free-floating rechargeable batteries in all living cells. And so when we talked about converting that energy into usable energy for our body, that is the usable energy that we have. It's going to be ATP. So how do cells directly fuel their chemical reactions? So none of the light energy from the sun can be used directly with our bodies. We cannot use that for cellular work, and neither can the plant. So when it takes it in, it's first going to have to be captured into bonds, and then it has to be transferred and converted over into adenosine triphosphate, or what you might commonly know as ATP. ATP is going to be the energy currency for our cells, and not just our cells as animals, but also cells of things like plants and other organisms. So this adenosine triphosphate is going to be the energy carrier for many different types of reactions. With its structure, it's going to be a nucleotide composed of the base adenine and the 5-carbon sugar ribose and 3 phosphate groups that are attached to it. ATP is converted to ADP plus a phosphate when you break that third phosphate off. In that process, energy is going to be released, and that energy released is going to be sufficient for biological reactions. So that's what actually runs the body. You create the ATP, you break that third phosphate off, the energy that comes from that third phosphate is the fuel. So looking at the structure, you see that adenine, you see the ribose, and you see that phosphate group. Notice that there are 3 phosphates hooked together with high energy bonds. When you break that third phosphate off, you release the energy that runs your cellular work, and you're left with ADP, adenine diphosphate. ADP can easily be recharged and made into ATP by adding a phosphate back on, and you get those phosphates from foods. So because cells cannot use light energy directly to do their work, they first have to capture it in a form, and not all animal or organisms can do this. Mainly plants are going to capture this energy from the light, transfer it over into a chemical energy, and from that chemical energy, the plant will use it to make ATP, or the animal can eat the plant and use it to make ATP. So first, the energy has to be converted into chemical energy in the ATP molecules. So like we said, pop off that third phosphate group, ATP becomes ADP and a phosphate group, and the energy is released. And so it gets released in little packets of energy. But if you think you have a lot of mitochondria per cell, depending on where that cell is located. If it's a muscle cell, it's going to have many, many more mitochondria than a cell, let's say, that's just doing its thing, let's say, in the lungs or in the nervous system. They're going to use the energy to drive chemical reactions necessary for cellular functioning. So it could help to build muscle tissue back. It could help to repair a wound. It could help to grow roots in a plant. All of this is actually going to use the ATP molecule. 3 main functions of ATP. They're going to be able to do chemical work. They supply energy to synthesize molecules that make up the cell. They can work with transport work and supply energy to pump substances across the plasma membrane. They can do mechanical work and supply energy needed to perform mechanical processes, let's say picking something up, walking across the street, things like that. And that's all going to be done through like muscle contractions. Recycling this in a cell, you can simply take the ADP that was once used as ATP, add another phosphate back onto it with some energy, and you have another ATP. So it's like a constant rechargeable battery that you can keep rebuilding. So in summary, cells temporarily store the energy in the bond of ATP molecules, and it's stored, remember, in that third bond, the end phosphate. This potential energy can be converted to kinetic energy and used to fuel life-sustaining chemical reactions. At other times, inputs of kinetic energy can be converted to the potential energy of the energy-rich but unstable bonds in the ATP molecule. Going in deeper, let's look at this photosynthesis process. Where does plant matter come from? Well, photosynthesis is going to help us understand how this plant gets bigger, how it grows, and how it gets energy. So from a seed to a tree, where does the actual mass come from? So we're looking at the small plant at only 5 pounds, but after 5 years, it turns into a bigger tree or bush, and now it's weighing in at 155 pounds. So where is all of this coming from? Well, it's actually absorbing a lot of water in from its roots, as well as different nutrients that it will find in that soil. And so as it takes that in, along with the sunlight that it's able to capture, it's actually going to grow, create more cells, and make this plant mass go up in size. All right, so with these photosynthetic organisms, some bacteria and many other unicellular organisms are also going to be able to produce their own food using photosynthesis, different things like protists. So here we're looking at Cyanobacterium, Euglena, and dinoflagellates. These are going to be some that are commonly able to produce their own food through photosynthesis or by absorbing that sunlight. So photosynthesis is going to require 3 inputs or 3 products. It has to have a form of light energy, and of course the sun's the major form, carbon dioxide, which is going to get from the atmosphere, And then water, which if it's a plant, it's going to get that from the ground. It cannot take it in through the leaves. It has to take that in through the roots. It's going to release two byproducts. Those two byproducts that it creates is going to be sugar, which it stores in the cells, and oxygen, which if it's a plant, it's going to release through the pores that are in the leaves. So you have two parts making up photosynthesis. You have the photo part, where the energy is captured from the light, and then the synthesis part, where that energy is going to be converted over into a chemical form. So in summary, through photosynthesis, plants use water, the energy of sunlight, and carbon dioxide gas from the air to produce sugars and other organic materials. In the process, photosynthesizing animals also produce, or organisms also produce oxygen, which makes all animal life possible. Photosynthesis is going to take place in the chloroplast. That is going to be the specific organelle that's going to be found in plant leaves and other parts of the plant. So if you look at it closely, you can see photosynthetic cells packed with chloroplasts. Inside that leaf, you see that top edge of the leaf, and then you'll see that bottom part of the leaf. The chloroplast, like we said, is an organelle found in plant cells where photosynthesis occurs. It's mainly found in the leaves of plants, and usually you'll find around 40 to about 200 chloroplasts per cell. The main components of the chloroplast are going to be the stroma, the thylakoid, and chlorophyll. Let's look at those a little closer. The stroma is going to be the gelatinous matrix that's going to be found in the inner compartments of the chloroplast. So it's kind of like the cytoplasm that you would find inside of the cell, except for this is going to be the gel-like matrix that you find inside of this chloroplast. It's going to contain DNA, and remember this DNA is going to be unique to that chloroplast. It is not going to match the DNA of the plant, because remember we thought that chloroplast came in through an endosymbiosis route. It also is going to have ribosomes and other various enzymes inside. The location of the synthesis reaction, where chemical energy is used to synthesize sugars, is also going to be done in the stroma. So here you see what we refer to as a thylakoid. That's going to be that circular structure that you see, and it's going to have chlorophyll in its little sections there. You see them as little bubbles on top. You can stack a stack of thylakoids together, and they're referred to as a grana, G-R-A-N-A. That would be a stack of thylakoids. And so the stroma is going to be the gel-like substance that's actually inside that surrounds the thylakoid or the grana. So thylakoids are interconnected membranous structures. They're organized, like we said, into stacks called grana, and they're the location of the photo part of the reaction. So that chlorophyll that you see on top of the thylakoid and on the bottom, that's going to be where the light's going to be captured and converted. The chlorophyll is the pigments that are involved in helping capture or absorb that solar energy. What happens is they energize electrons prior to reduction of carbon dioxide to a carbohydrate. And that's going to be found within the thylakoid membranes that you see there. So you see them dotted throughout. So in plants, photosynthesis occurs in the chloroplasts, a green organelle that's packed in the cells near the plant's surface. Light energy is going to travel in waves, so plant pigments are going to absorb specific wavelengths. So light energy, like we said, is going to be a type of kinetic energy. It is moving. It's made up of little energy packets that are referred to as photons. This makes up a small portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. The spectrum of colors are going to range from violet to red. And so with that electromagnetic spectrum, you're going to see this visible light in the dead center part. You're going to have things above it and things going down the line, but visible light's going to be right in the center, and we'll look at that in a minute. So the energy source for photosynthesis is going to be this visible light section. The different photons are going to carry different amounts of energy that are carried as waves. And so the length of the wave is going to equal the amount of energy that that photon carries. There are three fates when striking an object for light. It could either be reflected, and that's going to be when the light bounces off of an object and determines the color of that object. Leaves are going to be green because pigments that they possess inside of them don't absorb green. They're actually reflecting green. So it is absorbing all other colors but green. And so green light, if it was to be shined on the plant, it would die because it can't absorb that and change it over into a chemical form of energy. White light reflects all wavelengths and absorbs none. So white light is reflecting all colors back. Black light is reflecting no color back. It's absorbing all the colors. And so that's what makes black black. Also, if you're outside in the sun, if you're wearing a white t-shirt, you can tell that you're not going to be nearly as hot as if you're wearing a black t-shirt. That white t-shirt's reflecting all light back, whereas the black t-shirt is absorbing all of that light. So you would be much hotter. The light could be transmitted, and that's where light passes through an object, and it determines the color of that object. So if we're looking at green, then we know it's transmitting green and absorbing all other colors. If that shirt is pink or the flower is pink, it's absorbing all colors but pink and is reflecting pink back. And the third fate, it could be absorbed. And so this causes an effect and function of photosynthesis. So the colors or pigments that you're going to use in a plant are going to determine what's being absorbed. And so green, usually it's not being absorbed, that's what's being reflected back. So looking at this, the electromagnetic spectrum, which I said, the visible light, is right there in the center. You can have larger waves, such as radio waves and infrared waves that travel in larger waves. You can have, but when it travels larger, it's going to be much slower. After the visible light, you see UV, X-ray, and even gamma rays. They start to travel much faster, but the waves are going to be shorter and smaller. They have more energy, but they're smaller, and they don't travel nearly as far as the ones that are longer and bigger. So with the visible spectrum, the range of energy that humans see is going to be found here. And it's going to be made up of what you might remember from elementary school as your Roy G. Biv. Red being the largest visible wavelengths, but they're also going to be the slowest moving. Orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Violet moves the fastest of the colors, and the wavelengths are going to be much smaller. Pigments are going to be a substance in which an object is going to use or an organism will use molecules to absorb light. So some different pigments that we're going to look at. Plant pigment found in the thylakoid membrane will be chlorophyll. It's going to absorb certain wavelengths of energy and photons from the sun, and it's going to absorb energy. It's going to excite these electrons and cause them to jump up to the next level. So with plant pigments, they can only absorb specific wavelengths of energy. Therefore, plants produce several different types of pigments in order to take advantage of the light coming in, so it can capture more energy. We have what's referred to as chlorophyll A. This is going to be a primary photosynthetic pigment. It efficiently absorbs blue-violet and red wavelengths. You have chlorophyll B that absorbs blue and red-orange wavelengths. It's going to reflect yellow and green. And then you have what's referred to as your carotenoids. These absorb blue-violet and blue-green wavelengths and reflect yellow, orange, and red wavelengths. And so this is what they look like on a spectrum as far as wavelength. So why do leaves turn beautiful colors each fall? Looking at this, you can see with the chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and the carotenoids, the things that they're reflecting back. In the fall, notice how chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B start to reduce, so that plant pigment's not going to be as visible. These chloroplasts are starting to die out some, so you're losing the chlorophylls, but the carotenoids are still there, capturing what sunlight is coming in, even though the days are shorter. And you're starting to see these reds, these oranges, these yellows to reflect back, because with the dying out of the chloroplast and as the daytime gets shorter, it's only going to show you these carotenoids that are going to be inside of that leaf. So now you're starting to see the beautiful colors that are there with the different colors of greens. So photosynthesis is powered by light energy, a type of kinetic energy made up from energy packets called photons. Photons hit chlorophyll and other light-absorbing molecules near the green surface of plants. These molecules capture the light and energy and harness it to build sugar from carbon dioxide and water. Photons can cause electrons in chlorophyll to enter an excited state. So with electron excitation, the conversion of electromagnetic energy into chemical energy of bonds between atoms is going to occur when chlorophyll is hit by visible light, or light coming, let's say, from the sun. Photons of specific wavelengths are going to bump the electrons up a quantum level into an excited state. There's going to be two potential fates of these excited electrons. The first fate is it can return to its resting position in its unexcited state, or the excited electrons are going to be passed to other atoms. And so here you see that light energy bumping an electron in the chlorophyll molecule to a higher excited energy level. And so it jumps up, and then it can either come straight back down, or it could jump over to a nearby molecule. The passing of electrons in their excited state is going to be a chief way that energy moves through cells, so from cell to cell. Molecules that gain electrons always carry greater energy than before receiving them, so they can view this as a passing of potential energy from one molecule to the next. So in summary, when chlorophyll gets hit by photons, the light energy excites an electron in the chlorophyll molecule, increases the chlorophyll's potential energy. The excited electron can be passed to another atom, moving that potential energy through the cell. Photosynthesis in detail. So the energy from the sunlight is going to be captured as chemical energy. And the way we figured this out, or the way we follow it, is by following the electrons. So we're taking in the photo part, that's going to have sun and water coming in, and then we're going to create energy storing molecules, and oxygen. So remember that photoreaction is going to occur in the thylakoids. So this photoreaction, also known as photophosphorylation, or you could call it the light-dependent reaction, it occurs in the thylakoid of the chloroplast. The reactions are going to involve the reaction in the center of the chlorophyll. So special chlorophyll molecules are going to be responsible for exciting electrons with light energy. 4 steps is how this is going to happen. First, water splitting photosystem. The light energy is going to excite electrons donated by water. The first electron transport chain is going to have electron energy creating proton gradients that generate ATP molecules. The third, the NADPH producing photosystem, is going to have electrons that are donated from the water splitting photosystem. And then the second electron transport chain is going to have high energy electrons that are used to reduce NADP plus to NADPH. And those are going to be electron carrying molecules. And so here you see in a picture form what's going on. So the sunlight is going to hit the leaf. When it hits the leaf, you're going to see that light energy is used to transfer electrons in the primary electron acceptor. Those electrons are going to be donated by water, so you see them coming in, and the hydrogen as a byproduct. So hydrogens are going to be released, the electrons coming up, oxygen flowing through. The first electron transport chain is going to take the high energy electrons that are used to pump hydrogen ions into the thylakoid. The kinetic energy from the release of these ions is going to then be used to build ATP. NADPH producing photosystems is going to be where the NADPH is going to be identical to the water splitting photosystem, except the electrons are going to be donated by the electron transport chain. And so you see how it came from number 2 over to the next atom, and number 3, and then 4. The second electron transport chain is going to have high energy electrons that are going to be passed to the NADP+, and it creates NADPH. That's going to be a high energy electron carrier. So electrons that leave the photosystem are going to be replenished. So where exactly does this oxygen come from? So as the light energy excites electrons in the chlorophyll molecule, that energy from the excited electrons is transferred to nearby chlorophyll molecules. When the transferred energy excites the electrons in the chlorophyll A molecule, the primary electron acceptor is going to grab them and send them to the electron transport chain. To replace the electrons sent to the electron transport chain, water molecules are going to be split, and oxygen and hydrogen are going to be released as a byproduct. So you see primary electron acceptor over to the side. The electron transport chain is going to send the electrons through to chlorophyll, and then you see the chlorophyll A. Then oxygen is then going to be released into the atmosphere when it split that water. So the net equation for photosynthesis, you're going to take 6 carbon dioxides, 6 waters, and that's going to make C6H12O6, which is a glucose molecule, and then 6 oxygen molecules. And so that's going to be what you're creating. You're creating sugar and 6 oxygen molecules that get released into the atmosphere. That chlorophyll pigment is responsible for capturing that light energy. Photosystems are going to be networks of light-absorbing chlorophyll molecules and other pigments. And you have 2 types of photosystems. You have what's referred to as photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. And what they do is they absorb light energy and use what's referred to as a redox reaction to store energy in ATP molecules and in NADPH. Thylakoids are going to be cellular membranes that contain these photosystems. So looking here at the electron transport chain, you see how the electrons are going to move through the electron transport chain, releasing energy and falling to lower states. And notice how they're going from these proton pumps, and they continue to fall. The released energy powers proton pumps that move hydrogen ions from the stroma and pack them inside of the thylakoid. Protons are then going to rush out of the thylakoid with great kinetic energy, which can be used to build ATP molecules. So product 1 of the photo portion is going to be ATP. Then we're going to head into the second photosystem. And so you're still going to follow those electrons and notice how it goes through that process. Product 2 of the photo portion is your NADPH, which is a high energy electron carrier. It's going to be the second important product of the photo portion of photosynthesis. So you had ATP and then NADPH. Now it's going to be time for building the sugar molecule. So this is going to be the synthesis part. We captured the energy. Now let's build the sugar. So in summary, there's going to be 2 parts of photosynthesis. The first is the photo part, which light energy is transferred into chemical energy while splitting water molecules and producing oxygen. Sunlight's energy is the first captured when the electrons in chlorophyll are excited. As the electron is passed from one molecule to another, energy is going to be released at each transfer, some of which is going to be used to build the energy storage molecule ATP and NADPH. So on to the synthesis part. We've captured it. Now let's make food. So synthesis reactions are also known as the dark reactions because they don't directly require light, or they can also be referred to as light-independent reactions. It's going to occur in the stroma of the chloroplast. So this is that jelly-like substance, kind of like cytoplasm. It's going to use the ATP and NADPH generated from the light-dependent reaction that we just did to create the energy. This is going to involve what we refer to as the Calvin cycle or even the Calvin-Benson cycle. So in the Calvin cycle, it's going to be a series of chemical reactions that occur in the stroma, and it's going to use enzymes that are recycled. So here we see in the picture, it's going to take an ATP, an NADPH, carbon dioxide, and it's going to go around and end up making sugar. So it's a three-step process in which carbon dioxide is going to be reduced to produce glucose. First step is fixation. The enzyme Rubisco is going to pluck carbon atoms from carbon dioxide molecules in the air. Carbon atoms are attached to organic molecules, and so this is why plants need carbon dioxide instead of oxygen, because they're going to use that carbon and actually put it into that sugar molecule. Second step, sugar is going to be created. So that organic molecule is going to be modified into a sugar called glyceryl 3-phosphate or G3P, using energy from ATP and NADPH generated during the photoreaction. So some of that G3P molecule is going to be combined to form a 6-carbon sugar. It could be glucose, or if we're talking about a fruit, it could be fructose. So here is a visual of what we just talked about. We started out with the Rubisco, which is going to be an enzyme that's going to fix that carbon dioxide and pluck the carbons out. It creates that organic molecule. It's going to use ATP and NADPH and create that G3 particle. From there, that G3 molecule is going to be put together and help create sugar. The third step is the regeneration step, where some of that G3P molecule is going to be used to regenerate the original organic molecule ATP, and so it's going to continue to go around the circle. So the second part, or the synthesis part of photosynthesis, is the Calvin cycle, and it occurs in the stroma of the chloroplast. So you capture light, remember, in the thylakoid, and now you're going to actually make it into sugar or glucose in the stroma. Carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is going to be attached or fixed to molecules in chloroplast. Sugars are going to be built, and the molecule regenerated to be used again in the Calvin cycle. These processes consume energy from ATP and NADPH, the products of the photo part of photosynthesis. This is where we're going to stop. We will pick up with our part 2 in cellular respiration.